History remembers kings and queens for their power. But the stories we're about to tell? They were never meant to be remembered at all. A queen who married a dead pharaoh and vanished without a tomb. A foreign king who stabbed a god and was cursed with madness. A royal child worshipped as a living deity, then sacrificed. A lone African queen who ruled like a god and disappeared. And a Maya king so powerful he was believed to rule even in death. These were rulers not just feared, but erased. Buried in silence, mystery, and blood. Tonight, we open their forgotten tombs. Welcome to 5 Forgotten Royal Nightmares, where power never came without a price. Chapter 1. The Queen Who Married a Dead Pharaoh. In the golden twilight of ancient Egypt's 18th dynasty, after the boy king Tutankhamun died under mysterious circumstances, the throne of Egypt stood vulnerable, shadowed by court intrigue and divine silence. His widow, Queen Ankhesenamun, was young, barely in her 20s and, suddenly alone in a palace riddled with secrets. Her name is barely whispered in modern history books, yet her story remains one of the most chilling and forgotten royal tragedies of the ancient world. She had grown up amid religious chaos. Her father was the heretic Pharaoh Akhenaten, the king who tried to erase Egypt's many gods in favor of one, Aten, the sun disk. Ankhesenamun's mother may have been Queen Nefertiti, though the records are broken and deliberately defaced. Born into a collapsing regime and married off young, possibly even to her own father, then to her half-brother Tutankhamun, Ankhesenamun never knew peace. By the time she became queen consort, the political and religious orders were both unraveling. And when Tutankhamun died, still a teenager, her world disintegrated with him. What makes Ankhesenamun's story so unsettling isn't just her misfortune, it's what she did next. Alone, surrounded by power-hungry viziers, and with no surviving royal male heirs, she broke every sacred rule of Egyptian tradition. She wrote a letter to a foreign enemy. The letter, discovered much later in the Hittite royal archives at Hattusa, was short but shocking. In it, she begs the king of the Hittites, Egypt's military rival, to send one of his sons to become her husband and pharaoh of Egypt. Her words are desperate. "Never shall I. Take a servant of mine and make him my husband," she writes. "I am afraid." In the rigid, theocratic world of ancient Egypt, no queen had ever invited a foreign prince to rule on the throne of Horus. The pharaoh was not just a king, he was a living god. Bringing in a foreigner was not just political treason, it was spiritual heresy. And yet Ankhesenamun was willing to risk it all. Her actions hint at something darker behind the royal facade. Fear. Fear of being forced to marry a usurper. Fear of being silenced by court officials. Fear of becoming a pawn in a game of blood and power. The Hittite king, confused but intrigued, agreed and sent his son, Prince Zenonza, on the dangerous journey to Egypt. But the prince never made it. Somewhere along the route near the Egyptian border, he was ambushed and murdered. Records don't say who killed him, but many believe it was orchestrated by the powerful vizier. Who would soon marry Ankhesenamun himself and crown himself pharaoh. What happened to her next is perhaps the eeriest part of the tale. After A's coronation, Ankhesenamun disappears completely from the historical record. Her name vanishes from inscriptions, tombs, and temples. No confirmed mummy or tomb has ever been found. Unlike other queens of the era, she left behind no grand resting place, no detailed legacy. She was erased, as if deliberately removed from history. Some scholars believe she was forced to marry against her will, her political gamble having failed disastrously. Others think she was murdered. Few even suggest she was imprisoned, her plea to the Hittites considered too dangerous to forgive. The silence that follows her act of desperation is deafening. Even her famous golden ring with her name and A's inscribed was likely not a token of love, but one of forced union. And then there's the tomb. In 2017, radar scans near Tutankhamun's resting place revealed the possibility of hidden chambers, sparking speculation that Ankhesenamun might be buried in a forgotten annex concealed for millennia. Egyptologists are still searching, but to this day, her final resting place has never been found. Her story, barely a footnote in most histories, is one of Egypt's most poignant ghost tales. She was born into heresy, raised in chaos, married to a dying boy god, and left to fend for herself in a palace of shadows. Her final act, treaching across enemy lines for salvation, was a move born of sheer terror, and one that sealed her fate. To the ancient Egyptians, erasure was the worst punishment. And Ankhesenamun, once a queen of divine blood, was condemned not only to death, but to oblivion. And yet, we remember her, through fragments, letters, and broken rings. A whisper between empires. A woman who dared to choose and paid the ultimate price. Now, we leave her darkened halls behind, and step further into the shadows, where the next ruler defied gods, not with a letter, but with a blade. Chapter 2. The King Who Stabbed a God. In the rocky highlands of ancient Anatolia, where cold winds whipped through stone temples and fire-lit shrines, a story once echoed across the Hittite Empire that no scribe dared preserve too clearly. It was whispered that one of their greatest kings had done the unthinkable not in war, but in ritual. He had offended the gods with blood, not animal blood, nor the blood of men, but something older, more divine, and it changed him forever. King Mursili II came to power during a time of plague. His predecessor, Suppiluliuma I, had built an empire feared from Egypt to Babylon. But he died suddenly, rumors say by disease brought from Egypt after a botched diplomatic marriage. The plague did not stop with him. For over 20 years the gods of Hatti remained silent, their favor withdrawn. Crops failed, children died. Priests wept before unresponsive idols. The empire trembled. Mursili, young and untested, turned to ritual and prayer, desperate to uncover the sin that had cursed his people. He wrote prayers, real ones, preserved on clay tablets. In one he confesses, I, the servant of the gods, do not know the offense, but still I suffer. And then the blood ritual. It is never described outright in the tablets, but archaeologists found a chamber in Hattusa, deep beneath the great temple, filled with unusual remains. Animal bones, yes, but also an altar carved with the symbol of the storm god Tarhunt, streaked with something darker. Analysis found traces of copper and human proteins, indicating the use of ceremonial blades on human flesh. Some scholars believe Mursili made a desperate offering, perhaps the blood of a royal child, or even a priest. One fringe theory suggests he attempted to force a god to speak, by injuring a sacred statue, considered a living vessel. This axe stabbing a god's image was believed to release the divine spirit trapped inside. It was a method condemned by later texts as inviting madness. Not long after, records show Mursili began to suffer from hallucinations, paranoia, and seizures. His letters grow frantic. He begins blaming invisible enemies, claiming the gods speak to him in fire and stone. He isolates himself, sometimes disappearing from court for days. Eventually, his scribes stop recording his words. Mursili ruled for decades, somehow holding his empire together, even as his mind decayed. And when he died, his body was sealed in a tomb without blessing. A rare dishonor. Today, the chamber beneath Hattusa remains one of archaeology's most puzzling sights. Some say it was a place of purification. Others believe it was the setting for a crime against the Divine One that brought madness to a king and ruin to an empire. What drives a ruler to stab a god? Desperation, arrogance, or something older, whispering from the shadows? Next, we follow a different kind of sacrifice. Not one made by a king, but one demanded of a royal child. Chapter 3. The prince buried alive for the rain high in the mist-covered Andes. Long before the Spanish ships appeared on the horizon, the Inca Empire thrived, golden and vast. From the Pacific coast to the mountains, frozen peaks, its rulers were believed to be descendants of the sun god Inti. Their word was law. Their will was sacred. And sometimes that will demanded the unthinkable. In a bleak, wind-scraped mountain above 6,000 meters in elevation, archaeologists unearthed a burial unlike any other a small child, perfectly preserved by the cold. His face was serene, lips slightly parted, as if still whispering a prayer. He had been dressed in fine alpaca cloth, adorned with feathers and silver pins. His body placed in a sitting position and left to freeze in solitude. They called him the Plomo Boy, discovered atop Argentina's Cerro El Plomo in 1954. But this child, just 8 or 9 years old, was no ordinary sacrifice. Evidence suggests he was of noble birth, perhaps even royalty. He had been chosen for the kapaka. Kapakaka was the most sacred of Incan rituals, an offering to the gods that could only be fulfilled with perfection. The children selected were healthy, beautiful, unblemished. Some were the sons and daughters of nobles. Others were taken from local tribes as tribute. But the highest honor, or perhaps the gravest curse, was for a royal child to be offered to the mountain spirits, the Apis. The ritual began with a long journey. These children were led in solemn procession across hundreds of miles from Cusco, the empire's heart, to the remotest peaks. Along the way, they were celebrated, fed rich meals, clothed in ceremonial finery. They drank chicha, a corn beer, often laced with coca leaves to dull their senses. The priests told them they would join the gods. But the reality was colder. At the mountain's summit, the children were buried alive or left to succumb to the freezing wind. Some were given a final drink to lull them into sleep. Others show signs of blunt trauma, suggesting they were killed before burial. But the Plomo boy was different. His body showed no signs of violence. The position of his limbs and his undisturbed clothing suggests he froze to death slowly, painfully, entirely alone. What makes this sacrifice more disturbing is its intent. These weren't offerings to please angry gods. These were transactions, rituals carried out with precision, meant to ensure reign, fertility, and the emperor's divine favor. In the Incan worldview, the land itself was alive. The mountains were gods, and they demanded respect, or blood. But why a prince? Some historians believe the Plomo boy may have been the son of a high-ranking noble, or even a direct descendant of the Sapa Inca himself. His selection would have been a grand gesture to show the empire's devotion and ultimate gift to the gods. Royal blood for divine blessing. Imagine it. A boy raised in gold-covered palaces, trained to speak the sacred Quechua language, taught the cycles of the sun and moon. One day told he would not grow up to rule, but to die. Not in battle or accident, but in slow sacrifice, in the loneliest place on earth. When archaeologists examined his remains, they found signs of high-altitude adaptation. He had lived for weeks at the mountain base, acclimating to the thin air. His last meals were traced in his stomach corn, coca, and llama meat. Offerings were placed beside him, figurines of gold and shell, small sandals and feathers. His death was part of a choreography, every detail controlled. But for all the ceremonial care, there was no mercy. Perhaps the most haunting aspect is his face. Perfectly preserved by ice. His expression is not one of agony, but peace. Some believe he was heavily sedated. Others think he accepted his fate with the resignation of one raised in a world where divine will could not be questioned. Still, there's no monument to him. No song. His name is lost. All that remains is a frozen corpse in a museum vault, his eyes closed to a sky that once demanded his soul. Modern Andean people still speak of the Apisa mountain spirits. Some villages leave small offerings to the peaks, fearing drought or disaster if they don't. And in some places, locals whisper of the children who still sleep under the snow, still watching. The Capacoca sacrifices remind us that power, especially royal power, has always carried a cost. For the Inca, the emperor was the son of the sun, and sometimes even the sun demanded his own flesh. Now we leave the icy tomb behind and descend into another realm, where a queen's bones told a story of poison, madness, and forgotten vengeance. Chapter 4. The African Queen Who Ruled Like a God, Then Vanished. In the sweltering heat of ancient Nubia, where the Nile carved deep into golden sands and temple walls shimmered with the names of forgotten kings, there once ruled a queen cloaked in both reverence and fear. Her name was Amenarinas, though in later whispers she became something else entirely, a warrior queen, a goddess in human form, and then suddenly nothing. Her story comes from a place the Romans called Kusha Kingdom, to the south of Egypt, rich in gold, iron, and blood. In the 1st century BCE, when most of Africa was still barely a rumor in Roman minds, Amenarinas led her people not in submission, but in defiance. She was blind in one eye. She wore the double crown of Kush and carried a lion-headed staff. And unlike nearly every ruler of her time, male or female, she dared to strike directly at the Roman Empire. When Augustus, fresh from crushing Cleopatra and claiming Egypt, turned his gaze south, he found resistance in a form he did not expect. Amminorinas gathered her army, rallied her generals, and launched a preemptive strike. Her warriors, armed with spears and curved swords, stormed into Roman-held Egypt. They sacked cities, they burned temples. They even captured a Roman legionary statue of Augustus himself, decapitating it, burying the head beneath the steps of a temple in Meru, so that every time her people worshipped, they stepped on the face of Caesar. It was a message, and one the Romans never forgot. Augustus sent his own legions in retaliation. The war dragged on for years, bloody, confusing, and mostly forgotten by modern history. The Romans, used to crushing resistance, struggled in the Nile's southern cataracts. The land was too harsh, the warriors too fierce. Eventually a truce was struck. Kush would remain independent, no tribute, no chains. A treaty written not in conquest, but in uneasy respect. And then, Amminorinas vanished. There are no surviving tombs bearing her name, no stele marking her death. No detailed records beyond brief Roman accounts and a handful of stone inscriptions half-worn by sand and time. For a woman who humiliated one of the greatest empires in history, her disappearance is eerie, almost surgical, as though someone or something erased her from the story. But in Nubian legend, she never died. Local oral histories still passed down among elders along the Upper Nile tell of a queen who never aged, walked into the desert one evening at twilight, and simply did not return. Some say she became a lioness spirit watching over the land. Others say she ascended, body and soul, to join the gods of Meru and the stars. There is archaeological evidence that something strange happened in the royal burial grounds of Meru around the time of her reign. A set of royal pyramids smaller than Egyptian ones, but equally sacred, were suddenly abandoned. One was found desecrated, its foundation cracked, the offering chamber filled with scorched bones of animals and possibly humans. No record explains why. And among the ruins, one object stands out: a polished stone statue of a woman, one eye blank, the other carefully carved. On her head, the serpent crown of the Kushite queens. She holds a weapon not of ceremony, but of war. Her expression is not peaceful, it is defiant. Some scholars speculate that Amminorinas defied not just Rome, but her own priesthood. In Kush, royalty was entwined with the divine queens, and kings were chosen in part by oracle and omen. If she began to believe herself more than just queen, if she claimed divinity not symbolically, but literally, it may have triggered a silent rebellion. A ruler too powerful could threaten the gods themselves. This theory, though fringe, finds some eerie support in the writings of later Christian missionaries who entered Nubia centuries afterward. They wrote of local spirits, desert queens who ruled the winds, and one particularly feared legend, the one-eyed goddess, whose wrath turned stone to ash and whose name must not be spoken near water. One passage reads, "Her eye is the moon, and when it weeps, the river floods." Perhaps these are just myths layered over memory. But in a land where history was carved into rock and then swallowed by sand, such myths are sometimes all that remains. And so, we are left with fragments. A queen who fought Rome and won, then stepped beyond the edge of the known world. Was she assassinated by rivals? Entombed in a lost pyramid? Or did she, as the stories say, walk into the desert and become something else? The silence she left behind is louder than any legacy. As the sun sets over the Nubian plains, the wind sometimes howls like a lioness. And somewhere, under the dunes or among the stars, the queen with one eye still watches. But the shadows grow deeper. And now, we descend into the final story, one of ancient madness, royal incest, and a queen whose bloodline was her doom. Chapter 5. The Maya king who ruled even in death. Deep in the humid jungles of modern-day Chiapas, Mexico, where moss grows over shattered temples and howler monkeys scream in the dawn, lies a city once believed to be the beating heart of a kingdom beyond death. Its name was Palenque. And at its center ruled a man the Maya did not consider entirely human, a king whose power stretched beyond the grave. His bones were believed to command storms, time, and even gods themselves. His name was Inik Janab Pakol, but history remembers him as Pakol the Great. He ascended the throne in 615 CE, at just 12 years old, after years of internal unrest and dynastic collapse. His mother, a powerful noblewoman named Sakkuk, served as his regent, but even in boyhood, Pakal was no puppet. Carvings show him performing rituals, offering blood to the gods, and ordering monuments built in his name before he turned 15. As he grew, so did his legend. He ruled for nearly 70 years, one of the longest-reigning monarchs in all of ancient history. And during his lifetime, Palenque was transformed into a city of mystery and awe. Towering temples, stone causeways, and labyrinthine tombs rose from the jungle. Every wall bore his image, every inscription sang his praises. But it was what came after his death that made Pakal truly terrifying to his people, and perhaps even to his enemies. In Maya religion, kings were seen as mediators between the gods and the earth. But Pakal went further. He didn't just communicate with the gods, he became one. His body was entombed inside the Temple of the Inscriptions, a 9-level pyramid meant to symbolize the Maya underworld Xibalba. It took decades to construct, and within its hidden chamber, archaeologists would later uncover a sarcophagus lid so ornate it launched 1,000 conspiracy theories. The carving on Pakal's tomb shows him descending, some say ascending, through a world tree, the cosmic axis of Maya belief. He's surrounded by celestial glyphs and strange, almost mechanical imagery. Erich von Däniken famously claimed it showed him piloting a spaceship, birthing modern ancient astronaut theories. But the truth may be even stranger. The Maya didn't bury Pakal just to honor him. They built his tomb as a portal, a gate through which he would continue to rule. He was believed to have transformed into a divine ancestor, one whose spirit would guide kings to come and whose power pulsed through the very stones of Palenque. Evidence suggests his successors conducted rituals directly above his tomb. Blood sacrifices, incense offerings, night vigils, they believed he heard them, that he judged them, that if angered he could curse crops or invite war. Pakal was not gone, he had merely changed forms, and perhaps in some way he did. Because when archaeologists opened his tomb in 1952, something strange happened. For one, his face was intact, like most Maya burials, where humidity and jungle rot reduced remains to fragments. Pakal's body preserved inside a red cinnabar-stained sarcophagus still had a near-complete skull and jade death, mass perfectly resting where it had been placed over 1,300 years earlier. Then there was the glyph. Inscriptions near the burial hint that Pakal would rise again, not metaphorically, literally. The text describes his journey through the 9 levels of the underworld, battling monsters and lords of death, and emerging reborn in a cycle that mimicked the movement of the heavens. Pakal wasn't just buried, he was sent on a cosmic mission, and someday he would return. Some locals near Palenque still whisper of a sleeping king beneath the stones. Tour guides report strange malfunctions near the temple compasses spinning, electronics shorting out. Others say that on certain nights, when the air is thick and the frogs go silent, the temple breathes, a subtle, rhythmic exhale, like the jungle remembering something it cannot forget. It doesn't end there. In 1994, a tomb was discovered beneath another temple in Palenque, the Temple of the Red Queen. Inside was a woman, her body also covered in red cinnabar, her teeth inlaid with jade, buried in splendor, but without a name. Some say she was Pakal's wife. Others believe she was a priestess, or even his mother, returned to rest beside the king she created. But nothing explains the eerie fact that her burial chamber aligns perfectly with his, creating a spiritual axis between the two sites. As if the architecture itself was designed to keep something contained, perhaps connected. So we're left with a city swallowed by the jungle, a tomb built like a cosmic machine, and a king whose people believed he never truly died. A ruler whose bones still command reverence, and maybe more. One archaeologist called it an ancient battery of belief, a place where devotion and fear coiled around a corpse like vines on stone. And here our journey ends. From queens who married ghosts, to kings who stabbed gods, to empires that vanished into legend, these stories are not myths. They are fragments of truth left behind by people who lived, ruled, and dreamed, sometimes too boldly. What's most terrifying is not that these rulers existed, but that they might still be waiting,